Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Okay, welcome to the show No Instructions. Today we have Dave Oldham with us from Awsm. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for the invite, man.
Yeah, cool.
You had so many cool guests on here. When you called me, I'm like, I don't know if I'm cool enough.
You're more than cool. Like
so many cool guests.
the problem with people that have like your experience in history, I think Johnny was, similar in a way. Johnny Hanna in another episode is like the time frame doesn't do it justice. Like an hour or less of talking about like this whole career path it's difficult to fit in one little bit.
You can ask my wife. I could talk about this for like days, and she tries to get me to not talk about it.
She's like
dinner parties and stuff. She's like, just shut up.
She's like, please stop.
Please stop.
No more sass. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So where does your story, hold on. Before we do that, just because we'll get to Awsm at the end, tell us what the company is that you're running today, real quick, and then let's go back into your story.
Okay, we'll go back on a cold, dark December morning.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
Ghetto. Yeah. So right now, I'm running a company called Awsm that was recently known as Pi-Fi. So a lot of people in the audience might know Pi-Fi. Super cool. I joined in August. Mm-hmm. Kickstart, a local VC firm who I love and I've had a great relationship with, called me and said, hey, there's this company that we love, such a cool idea. We'd love to see if you want to be involved in that. Yeah. And so I went, fell in love with the idea in about 30 seconds, which I'll explain in a minute, and really liked the team. So I had been consulting and not working full time. And so kind of got permission from the wife, like, okay, can I get back in the saddle and
a lot of hours?
Go like full time again. and actually I teased her because she might've been a little too excited for me to do that. Yeah. I was like, wait a minute, you're supposed to argue with me a little bit more. So it was cool. And it's been phenomenal. So Awsm is like Venmo for equity.
Yeah.
It gives companies the ability to use a little bit of their equity as a powerful tool to reward and motivate people outside their business, like agency partners, influencers and brand ambassadors, customers, employees. I mean, in certain ways, employees, but it's like they can give any amount of equity, like fractional amounts. It can be manual or automated. So it can be performance-based, like when influencers are driving new sales with a Shopify code, for example, every sale can automatically trigger issuance of a little bit of equity, like $5 at a time, $50 at a time, $100 at a time.
Yeah, it's really cool because like the problem with a startup is they're really valuable, but they're not worth anything until there's an event, right? And it's like if you could unlock some of that value along the way, it's kind of
the old way of doing it would be paperwork,
option
grants, and doing it one at a time.
Right.
And so you could maybe do that with a handful of influencers, and some brands have, but trying to do that with like 1,000 or 10,000 or 1 million customers, impossible.
Yeah.
So we unlock all of that. And then customers become raving fans. They've got skin in the game. They're more likely to buy more, stay longer, refer friends. It has all these really cool positive effects.
That's cool.
So we've kind of, I think, unlocked something pretty cool in letting brands use, and again, it can be small amounts, like a couple of points off of their cap table, and they can unlock the ability to like, turn their community into like owners and raving fans. And so it's been really fun.
That's really cool.
It's literally awesome.
I know. Yeah. Now I'm going to catch how many times say that, right? I hope you have that somewhere in your office. It's awesome.
No, we do. We do. We leaned into that as part of the rebrand. Like we loved the name Pi-Fi, but there was some potential trademark conflicts and some other stuff. So when I joined, I took them through this rebranding exercise, and we actually ended up with Awsm. And part of what we loved was, when I explain to people what we do, it's very natural for them without even thinking to say, oh, that's awesome. I'm like,
there you
literally go. Is. Yeah. So it's fun. It's fun.
That's cool. Okay. So you're a seasoned entrepreneur. Where does your story and influence start? Does it, when you were younger, or is it something that hit you when you were an adult?
That's actually a great question, because I was thinking about it on the way over here to the studio. in this age-old question of are entrepreneurs born or bred, right? Is it nature or nurture?
Right.
For me, I was just born into it, but there was also some nurture to it. So I'll tell both of those really quick. I was the type of kid that as like a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, I was out doing the lemonade stands. I was like hustling. In fact, the funny thing is I got this paper route maybe when I was 8 years old, but the paper that I was delivering was free. But I was young enough, I didn't really realize that. And one of the other paper boys that sold an actual paper came to our house, and he would knock on the door and say, "I'm collecting," and my mom would give him some money. So I went around to my paper route, which was a free newspaper,
That's so
and
awesome.
I tried to collect. I'd knock on the door and say, "I'm collecting." And a couple of dudes actually, this one old guy I remember laughed and gave me some money just because he thought it was so cute. And then he called my mom and he said, "Your son's just collecting, but it's a free newspaper that he's delivering." So yeah, it took me a while to catch on. But here's the little key aspect, like all the lemonade stands, all the lawns I mowed and the things that I did, I never just did it. I would get the job and then I would go hire my friends to do the work. And nobody told me to do that. So somehow in my head, it was almost built in that like, I'm going to go land these gigs and then I'm going to pay other people to do the work. And I'm just going to like manage it. And my early employees back when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old, probably thought that I was like the world's worst manager. It was a little Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, like, I was tricking them into paint the fence or whatever.
What did your parents do for a living?
So my dad is an entrepreneur.
Okay.
But I'm old enough. Yeah. I'm a little older than 50.
Yeah. Okay.
That when I grew up, entrepreneurship was not a thing anyone talked about. It wasn't cool. There wasn't an ecosystem. My dad started a newspaper out of college, and it was kind of like a newspaper and a thrifty nickel, like free classified, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then he'd get paid off of like display ads and stuff. Yeah. And then he wrote software when desktop publishing kind of became a thing. He wrote software that helped publish the newspaper.
Where'd you grow up? Where was this?
In Orem, Utah.
Oh, here.
Yeah,
okay.
As a little kid, and then I went to Spanish for high school.
Cool.
So I'm a Utah kid.
Yeah.
And one of my claims to fame, or one cool thing, is I actually, as from like 12 to 16, I designed screen fonts because when the Mac and desktop publishing like very first came out, it had like 8 or 9 fonts, but newspapers and other publishers needed like lots of different screen fonts that prior to that had been manually typeset, right? Like we can get into the old school
that
like
was
typesetting
really old
history.
school. Yeah.
So these publishers needed more screen fonts. So I started designing screen fonts, and I ended up making about $50 an hour back in, this is like the 80s.
Wow.
And I was like a 12-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid. So I got a Mongoose BMX bike. I bought a Joe Weider home gym. I was baller status. And then I think my dad actually was like, "Dude, you're just blowing all your money." And so he put me on a strict like budget, and I had to save and like put some away for college. I couldn't just like blow through all my cash.
It's good that he taught you that. So college, fast forward to college.
So
where'd you go?
So yeah, I went to BYU undergrad, and I wanted to be a doctor. So I was going the pre-med track, although I did English as a major. Okay. Well, because here's the thing. I had watched my dad struggle my entire youth. In fact, my dad grinded it out and built his business with no outside investment, just bootstrapped the thing. And so from birth until I was, I don't know, maybe 18 or 19, we had no money ever. Yeah. Like we were literally like food stamps, ramen, everything was budgeted to the penny.
Yeah.
I had one pair of shoes, like Sperry topsiders that I had to wear for church and school and basketball really cool and shoes. Soccer. And, they had to do everything.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, entrepreneurship was not cool. And because we were so poor, I did not want to do what my dad did.
Do you feel like it was in you to do it naturally, like as a kid, right?
Yeah.
But like when it became real and you became like kind of a young adult, you're like, this seems a little risky. Like maybe I'm just going to go get a job.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't even that logical. I loved my dad.
Yeah.
But my dad was struggling, and my neighbor was a doctor, and he drove a Porsche. And I remember the first time he pulled up in this Porsche, there was this huge, looked like a massive walkie-talkie. And he pulled it up and he started dialing on it. It was a cell phone. It blew my mind, right? I'd never even heard of like a cell phone.
How many of us were influenced by seeing a Porsche one day?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Porsche 911, which I've always loved since then.
Yeah.
So loving my dad, but I'm like, I want that guy's life. Yeah. I mean, he has like money and cool cars, and so I wanted to be a doctor. That's what inspired me to be a doctor. Totally. Was like this guy's lifestyle compared to my lifestyle or our lifestyle. And so I majored in English and pre-med. And at the end, I actually took the MCAT and did well and got accepted to a couple of med schools.
Really?
But somewhere in there, and here's the other cool thing, my dad was always super supportive. Never tried to talk me into like working with him or following his footsteps. He was like, hey, whatever you want to do.
And at the time, he was super supportive. He was still running his business when you were in college, let's say. Okay.
Yeah. So right about the time I left home, they started doing really, really well.
Okay.
And started making really good money. So now he has been an incredibly successful entrepreneur. Yeah. But in my formative years, it was a nightmare. Like it was a grind. Yeah, it was a grind. So I wanted to go to med school and got accepted, and he was super supportive. But I started doing, internships or rotations or like free. I just spent as much time as I could with lots of different doctors trying to decide what kind of specialty I wanted to go into. And I'd always ask every doctor that I worked with, like, if you could go back and do it all over again, would you do the exact same thing? And a majority of them said no. I'm like, really? And they're like, they started telling me all these things about like, well, originally I wanted to be an eye doctor, but there's a limited number of residencies and I couldn't get in. So I had to choose my plan B or my plan C.
Now I'm a family doctor.
Yeah. And I didn't really want to do that. I mean, yeah, I love my patients, but like, that's not really what I wanted to do. Yep. And I graduated with like $500,000 worth of debt and all these things that I'm like, and I was old enough by that point that it wasn't about like just driving a Porsche or whatever. I had to really decide, like, is this my purpose in life? Like, is this really what I want to do?
Were you like towards the end of, your undergrad, were you married yet or were you still single? Or?
No, I didn't get married until I was 36.
No way.
Yeah.
Now, for this community, that's kind of old, huh?
Oh, super old. I was shunned and, no, I dated a ton, but the thing was, and this is part of the story actually, is I did end up, fast forwarding a little bit, I did end up working with my dad and I traveled around the world selling the software that he'd built to newspapers.
Interesting.
To the world's biggest newspapers. And so I traveled a ton. Digital Technology International, DTI.
Yeah, cool.
And they were probably the world leader. If not, they were like, there was another one that was kind of always a competitor, like 1 and 2 in the world for selling software to daily newspapers. And this is the same software that my dad had originally wrote. I mean,
hired people to
write. It had evolved a ton, right? Like version 32 compared to version 1. But it was all based on that thing that like he wrote it to publish his newspaper, and then it grew and grew and grew and expanded.
And roughly, like what year roughly was this, after college?
I graduated from BYU in 96 or 7.
Okay.
And was at this point where I had to either commit to med school or go a different path.
Yeah.
And I wanted to at least get accepted to med school so that I didn't feel like the choice was being made for me. I wanted the option. So I got accepted to med school in a couple of schools, and was trying to make that decision. And again, my dad never put any pressure on me, but he's like, hey, what do you think you want to do? And I'm like, man, the doctor thing, I'm not sure. And I don't feel like I should commit to like another 8 years of school and all this debt if I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. And he's like, well, you got time to figure it out. In fact, I don't know if it's still the same way, but I think I could defer like for a couple of years or something. I could take some time anyway. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to take some time and figure this out. And so my dad said, well, why don't you come work with me for a little while until you figure it out.
Right.
Wink, wink, right? Like I think he was hoping that I would get sucked in. So I joined.
At that time though, also like there was a lot of influence, and maybe, Silicon Slopes did not exist back then.
No,
right?
It's still not, like entrepreneurship was still not cool.
Yeah. And But at the time, do you feel like maybe there was any influence for your dad in just the startup community in Silicon Valley? Like, I mean, that was just a couple of years before the burst, you know? There was a lot going on, at least in people trying to get into software. Or do you think he was really just trying to like, hey, this is the right way to solve this problem. Let's go build this.
He's that.
Okay.
He's an inventor and a problem solver.
Okay.
Never wanted any attention and never has been motivated by money at all. Beyond like the basic needs being met. Like he is a problem solver, and he's like, and I think that's drove a lot of his success in that industry was people knew that he was passionate and dedicated, and customers knew that he was like in it to help them be successful and not for any of the other reasons. And he got a great reputation doing that.
That's cool. So how long were you there?
So I ended up joining, and I was almost 10 years. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but I want to say we grew from about 15 million in revenue to like almost 100 million in revenue.
Whoa.
And was huge, and you know, lots of employees, maybe 300 employees, something like that.
So
a couple offices. We had an office in London, an office in Germany, and an office in Mexico, I think.
Was he able to kind of like ride that wave up before the, you know, Great Recession? Which would have been like, you know, 10 years later or so.
Yeah. In fact, so here's an interesting part of the story is when I committed, I was like, all right, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. And I'm going to take over the business. And he set some pretty clear ground rules. He was like, I'm not just going to hand this over to you. In fact, he admitted to me, because everyone's going to think this is nepotism and you're the silver spoon, I'm going to make it harder for you than anybody else, so that it's super clear in everybody's mind that you earned it and I didn't just like hand this to you.
Right.
So I was working like 60-hour weeks. I pretty much the entire time that I worked there, I got paid way less than maybe what a market rate for the positions that I was doing.
Right.
But I felt like I was just paying my dues and earning everybody's respect, hopefully towards I could eventually take it over.
So even at this point, let's say a few years in working with your dad at this company that's like growing like crazy.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you would have tried to go start a business again at any point, or were you just kind of enjoying what you were doing?
All in. So dedicated. And that goes back to the dating thing is I was dating lots of girls, but I was traveling and I worked. I was kind of a workaholic and that was hard on relationships. So I dated tons of fantastic girls, but a lot of them were like, you know, you're going to put the business over me. And for most of them, they were like, that's not cool. And so
entrepreneurs
I was
have
not
crazy
great
brains.
at these relationships. But lots of fantastic girls that I still have a lot of respect for. But I was a workaholic, admittedly, and I was all in.
Yeah.
And then at some point, my uncle, and there's a huge separate 2-hour story about this, but the gist of it is my uncle had serious asthma and health problems like most of his life, and was supposed to die like way younger. And so it was kind of a miracle that he'd lived as long as he did.
Okay. And
it came to the point where doctors basically said, there's pretty much nothing that modern medicine can do to help you. So we're like, kind of almost like we're done. And so my grandma was searching all around and found this witch doctor, for lack of a better term, that had an office in Austria and then had an office at Lake Havasu, Arizona. And he did all these natural herbal remedies and all this stuff, but it was not sanctioned by modern medicine.
FDA.
Not covered by insurance.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly expensive, but he had these phenomenal stories about lives that he'd saved. So long story shorter, the family had this huge kind of family meeting, and made this decision to put the business up for sale. And this was at a high point, you know, still rocking and rolling, but that would kick off a tremendous amount of cash for, in fact, I guess the other part of the story is my dad has 7 brothers, and he started the business and all of his brothers came and worked for him. So it was a huge family business. True family business. And he gave them all ownership. So all the brothers had ownership. So the idea was they would sell, and every brother would get his slice of the pie, and that would be enough money to take care of, my uncle and get the kind of treatment that he needed.
Yeah.
So they did that. Wow. And we had a big private equity group come in, buy the business. I learned a ton about private equity.
So you stayed on after the acquisition
for a little while.
Yeah.
There's part of the story here.
For a little.
We got to come to that part.
Yeah.
So, he actually moved to Lake Havasu and started getting all this treatment and stuff, and it worked. Like, it extended his life.
No way.
At least another 10 years. So it was fantastic.
Wow.
So in retrospect, it was the right. I think everyone feels like it extended it. He's gone now, but it definitely extended it, and
by a lot. I mean, that's significant.
They were better. Like,
when
he's
someone
gone,
has terminal illness.
He's gone, and it was at least another 10 years, maybe a little longer. But so it was great. But what happened is the private equity group came in and said, "Hey, we're not going to change anything. You guys are killing it. Everything's great." And then the minute they signed the papers, they fired all the family members, every single one, including me. And we were like, "What the?"
That's the private equity play.
That's the private equity play. And a friend of mine, I said, "What is going on? Like, we're the ones that have all the institutional knowledge. Like, we're the operators. We're doing this." And he's like, "Don't take it personal, but here's the deal. Family-run businesses are valued at a lower multiple than non-family-run businesses because they think, or the tendency is that there's a lot of nepotism and there's like poor management. So it kind of doesn't even matter. Right. They got to get rid of all you guys, and they're just going to roll it up into like 5 other businesses. Yep. So they got to downsize like every one of the businesses they roll up by 70%. So they get 5 times the revenue and 1 times the total number of employees." Right. And I was like, "Oh, so this is private equity." Welcome to private equity. Yep. No offense. I have some good friends in private equity, but I just didn't know the game plan. I didn't know that's what it was.
How old were you at this point, you think?
So this was in 2008. That makes me about, I was 37.
You would have been, in your 30s, right?
Yeah, 37 maybe.
So, so you met your wife at some point during that time too, right? So you were at that business and you met your wife. So you finally got married.
The last year I did finally, I found a girl, crazy enough, and she's partially blind, I think. She doesn't admit it, but she must have been to marry me. In fact, whenever we walk around holding hands, I hear people whisper, they're like, "That guy's either filthy rich or super funny, or both." Anyway, I don't deserve my wife. She's amazing. But the last year, right before the private equity thing happened, I was doing a double MBA at Columbia and at Berkeley, and working full time.
Wow.
And the reason I'm telling you this is that she met me right then. What I was doing is
You're not giving these girls a chance, man.
No, I was not. I was flying from New York to New York Thursday through Sunday, stacking all of my classes, because this was not like a nighttime MBA. This was like full MBA.
Yeah, or like all online.
All
like
of my, this was in person. Full, like Thursday through Sunday. Then I'd come back and stay at my apartment Monday through Wednesday, and then go the next weekend to Berkeley Thursday through Sunday. So doing 2 MBAs and working full time. Monday through Wednesday, I'd work like 15-hour days. So I'd get, 40 to 45 hours in 3 days.
Wow.
And then I was trying to date her.
Did anybody tell you were crazy?
Oh, everybody.
Like, did your dad say, like, "Dude"?
Actually, my dad was like, "Yeah, that's about
because
right."
he was crazy too.
Yeah. He's like,
"Okay, sounds
that feels
good."
Right.
Yeah.
But everybody else is like, "Dude, you're insane." And
so what about your wife though? Like, you're dating her.
Yeah. So the cool thing about it was when she knew I was crazy from the first minute we met.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I tried to spring entrepreneurship on her later or something. It was like, she knew I was insane.
Yeah.
And so I think she kind of went in eyes wide open. And I think, several family members who had a direct, pipeline to God, if you're religious, they prayed me into my marriage. Like, just please help her overlook all of his flaws and marry him in spite of the fact that he's an idiot. And they won the day. So I'm grateful for all of their prayers on my behalf.
Is she from Utah?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. She grew up in Alpine.
Yeah. Cool.
So we met up in Salt Lake, and we dated, and we got married, and then she was pregnant at my graduation with
the MBA.
Yeah, the MBA program.
So how much longer after that did you get fired?
I think it was about a year, about a year after I finished the program.
Yeah.
And again, that was also a total blindside.
Yeah.
Like they looked us in the eye and said, we're not going to make any changes. And then they, fired us all.
That's funny. I've heard that before.
Yeah. And, and so then I'm like, well, now what do I do? Cause I was all in the family business. Like that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And, so I took a little bit of time and I was thinking like, okay, I've got a brand new family. I've got to take care of them. I've got a bunch of ideas, but at that point, I didn't know how to get these ideas like off the ground.
Hold on. So at this point, your life got like derailed for a minute, right?
Yeah.
You had this awesome job. You're committed. You were there a long time.
Yeah.
Like over 10 years.
Yeah.
You finally got married. Thank goodness,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, thank goodness.
And like, did you feel like you could solve the problem of being unemployed by creating something and then go doing kind of what your dad did? Or did you feel like...
I was torn.
Okay.
I had a notebook of ideas that I just kind of popped into my head over years. But I was also super nervous because I had a brand new baby and, I was like, crap, I need to take care of my family.
Yeah.
And so I ended up where I'm going to go get a full-time job. And then I'll like nights and weekends, I'll tool around with some of these ideas and see if anything starts to stick. So I didn't have the guts to just forge ahead into entrepreneurship. I kind of took a more secure path to try and take care of my young family. So I went, I worked for a company that at the time was called UCN. We rebranded it to be In Contact. And then that got acquired by NICE. And so
I didn't know you were there.
Yeah, I was there through the conversion from UCN to In Contact. A lot of really cool people there. I worked there for about a year. And then I was always a big fan of this thing called Arbinger and the Arbinger Institute. They are the authors of the book Leadership and Self-Deception. Yep. So I got so into it that I got fully certified as a facilitator for Arbinger. Cool. And I had the opportunity to go work with Arbinger. So after In Contact, I went to work for Arbinger. I was there for about a year. And then I had been noodling on these startup ideas. And
when you say startup, was it tech or like consumer product?
All software.
It was in
all
the software
tech,
space.
Yeah, because that's where I'd kind of grown up.
Yeah, like even though your dad's business kind of started out as this old school thing, it wasn't anymore. It was like a full-on software company.
Yeah. With hundreds of employees, like at its peak, massive. I think close to 400 employees.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was, and we had offices in different places. So it was legit. And I'd learned a lot from him. He was a phenomenal leader, and my real MBA was by my dad's side. And so I have the unfair advantage compared to a lot of people that I had a really great mentor and a coach and someone who taught me how to be a good entrepreneur. And
like through scale though, like from small all the way to acquisition. Like a big acquisition.
Yeah. Decent acquisition for sure.
So, okay. So you got these ideas.
Yeah.
And
so
what do you do?
I'd started there about that time. There were like Boom Startup had just kind of launched.
Yeah.
And that was when entrepreneurship was starting to be a thing that people talked about. Silicon Slopes had probably kind of become something by that point. Like there was starting to be, there's,
sorry, not Domo,
I don't think it was Domo.
Omniture.
Omniture
would have happened.
Omniture was a thing, right?
Yeah,
so there was kind of like entrepreneurship was happening and there was some things going on. So I felt like there was a little bit more support group and opportunity. And so I pitched in Boom Startup my idea, and this one was O-codes. It was QR codes and like early QR codes.
Yeah.
And before phones could do it. So you had to have an app to like scan the QR code, right? And I got accepted, I think, into if I'm remembering right, the inaugural group of Boom Startup.
That's cool.
So
who ran Boom Startup? That was a Utah thing?
Yeah. At the time it was John Richards.
Really?
And I feel so bad because Rob Coons.
Oh, okay.
And Rob was kind of more my mentor. So I spent a lot of time with Rob. And so went through the incubator and came out. I never got any funding. I had a couple of term sheets or a couple of options, but they weren't the greatest.
Yeah.
So I think I actually turned them down and just decided to bootstrap it And I did. In retrospect, I probably should have taken some investment money, but I didn't understand it well enough or whatever. And
the investment community, like right now, it's really formulaic, like really mechanical. Like there's ways to get funding. I mean, assuming you're a good business.
In the support group and the knowledge base and all the tools now, it's 50 times easier than it was back then.
Yes, totally.
But I decided to bootstrap it and started getting some traction, started getting some customers, made a little bit of money. And then there was a partner that I'd partnered with that wanted to buy it. And I sold it for, a bit of money. It wasn't like, I didn't even want to tell my mom and dad about it. It wasn't that great of a story.
Yeah.
But I sold it because I was also starting to do this other thing, which ironically, like I was on the path to building Twilio, or something like Twilio.
Yeah.
I had started building with some really smart developers ways to connect all the mobile networks together so that with a single API, you could send texts across lots of different networks.
And Twilio would have probably been coming out
this was before Twilio.
Yeah,
and the irony was we could have built that, and then in retrospect, I could have built Twilio, but I was so focused on I was trying to use it for something else that I didn't even think about why don't I just sell this thing?
Right.
So I was an idiot. I was not a smart entrepreneur.
It's all easier in hindsight, right?
So I built something called EverText, and we were doing appointment reminders and other kind of text messagey things, a little podium, just a little bit like that jump, early on, and then sold that because another
partner.
What year
would have been this roughly?
Man, I want to say this was 2012 or 13 or something. And then 2010. Yeah. Because at the end of 2010 is when I was introduced to I was introduced to the idea that would become Nuvi. And so a friend of mine who worked at a creative agency had been working with Gatorade as a client.
Okay.
And social media was just starting to become a thing.
Yeah.
And they had teams of interns manually printing out tweets and Facebook and other social stuff, like early Reddit, and highlighting with markers, here's what people are saying. And then in these weekly meetings, they do a human analysis of here's the sentiment, here's what's hot, here's what's interesting.
Of printed
literally
tweets.
Binders, 3-ring binders that they would have in these meetings.
It's crazy.
And so they were trying to figure out hey, how can we stay on top of all of the conversations that are starting to happen in social media? Who's talking about us? Who's talking about our competitors?
And
who's talking about
who's
this?
they? What kind of company would this be, do you think?
Oh, Gatorade.
Oh, it was Gatorade.
It was Gatorade. They were trying to solve this problem.
Holy cow.
And so Struck, this creative agency, was working with Gatorade, and my friend was one of the owners of Struck. Oh. And he said, hey, they want to build a custom piece of software to listen to social media. And so Struck was amazing at design and interface, UI and graphic design, one of the best ever.
Did they help with the early version of Nuvi? Because it was beautiful.
Yeah,
it was a great
they
UI.
Were amazing, great designers, and they actually got some equity when we formed the company for a lot of the design work that they informed at the beginning. Cool. But in these conversations, we realized this should be a platform for everyone. Every consumer brand out there is going to need this, not just Gatorade.
Right.
And so we kind of proposed to Gatorade, hey, give us some of the money that you had budgeted for this custom project, but we're going to build a software company and a platform and then sell it to everyone. And we'll kind of grandfather you in or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's how Nuvi was born. In fact, in the very beginning, it was called Revelate, REVEL with the number 8. And then we were searching for a better, stronger brand name.
Yeah.
And I think one of the developers, it wasn't me, but somebody suggested hey, what about Nuvi?
What did it mean at the time?
New visualization and intelligence or something.
Yeah.
There was kind of a acronym behind it that inspired it.
Because
we never leaned into the acronym, but that's what kind of inspired the name.
Where it came from.
And so we did some trademark search, and Garmin had the Nuvi, which was a physical navigational device, but they're the only ones who held a trademark, and it was in such a different area that we're never gonna cross paths with them. We're not gonna build a navigational physical device. So we applied for some trademarks. I negotiated for the .com for over a year. talked them down from like $500,000 all the way down to like 30,000 in cash and then like 50,000 in equity.
You gave him equity?
Yeah, we gave him a little bit of equity. And what we said was like,
I've never seen that actually.
So a friend of mine, a friend of mine kind of coached me on this. And what we said was, we're going to lease it for a year and $30,000 represents the lease. If we don't hit our targets, if we start to fail, we'll give it back to you and no harm.
There's actually,
but if we want to keep it, then that unlocks the equity.
Got it.
And so we were successful and it was easy for us to do that by the time we got there.
There's I won't say the name, but there's a pretty notable tech company here in Utah that for 5 years now 6 years has leased their domain.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Like I think a lot of people don't know that.
It's a
you
thing.
can do that.
Yeah. And the strategy is like, well, hey, by the time it's either will be worth paying way more down the road, but if not, we'll just give it back to you. And so it's kind of a win-win deal, right? And so
but more than anything, it's a creative way to make it work. Like,
it was cool. A creative solution. So they finally went for it. We got Nuvi.com. And then we'd been working with Facebook and Twitter and several other networks to get @Nuvi as our handle. And they said, you have to get the trademark and you have to own the .com. And then because these other ones maybe were squatted on, like the handles weren't like someone really using it, but they had a name attached to it.
Yeah.
So once we got the .com and the trademark, then they kicked off the other people and gave us the @Nuvi. So we had a really strong brand at like the handles on all the social media, .com. We got like the .co and all the .net, .biz, whatever.
Yeah.
We had a really strong brand. And later in the story, that turned out to be good because when Nuvi got acquired by a company called Brickfish out of Chicago, the acquiring company ditched their name and kept the Nuvi brand. And so it played out pretty well, I think, over time.
For sure. It's super strong.
So started Nuvi.
Okay, so hold on. So what year is this?
This was 2011, like right at the beginning of 2011.
So you got this idea, you and a design firm kind of put together.
So it wasn't my idea, but that's why it's so great.
Got it.
And I've told so many, here's lessons learned.
Yeah.
The best way to build a business is to have a customer who has a specific demand and is trying to solve it the hard way, like printing out social media tweets with like markers, right? The pain is real.
Yeah.
And they said, we will pay a ton of money to solve this problem. That's the best way to start a business by far.
For sure.
So we talked Gatorade into giving us a portion of their budget up front, but said, you'll never have to pay us again. And that was kind of the seed money that got us to be able to start. And then we got some of the design stuff from Struck, who got some equity, and they were great. They did such a phenomenal job. And they did our branding, like really cool stuff.
So it gave you a little bit of seed funding to get started. But what was the initial team? Who was going to be on it?
So my friend had a couple of developers that he knew, and I had a couple of developers from DTI days that I knew. So we were like a mixed marriage of like sets of developers. And then I ran it. I was the CEO, and my friend was involved. He was actually running another company. And so we shared office space. So he was heavily involved in all the conversations and stuff.
But not day to day yet.
No, I mean, not in a leadership, like he was running his other company and we were brainstorming a ton of stuff. Like he was involved, but he was running that company. I was running Nuvi, and we were off to the races.
Okay. So you get your first customer and they pay you up front.
Yeah.
You're like, holy crap.
Yeah. Again, the best way to do it.
Yeah, seriously. I just talked about this with somebody else on another episode that Scott, who started Workfront, the customer paid them $500,000 to start.
Yeah.
Like with no product.
Yeah. And I've coached a bunch of entrepreneurs in saying like, hey, if you think this idea is great, identify who might be your first best phenomenal customer, go talk to them and say, hey, if I could solve this problem, what would you pay for it? Maybe give me a portion of that and I'll go build this thing and give you equity in my business. But you're starting with a real problem, a real customer, someone who's paying you.
It's so true.
Yeah, it's such a great way to do it.
It's how we launched Distro. I mean, with Distro, we sold a few $100,000, right away with just kind of a piece together MVP.
I think I've heard you say sell then build.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, literally.
100%.
And like, it's not just a survival mechanism of like getting cash. It's not just that. It's that you are getting the best source of feedback that you need to build the right product.
True product market fit. You know the problem that you're solving. Yeah. It immediately has application for a specific group or individual or whatever. Yeah. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay.
So even entrepreneurs that are dreaming up ideas, like it's not bad to have ideas, but just go find your customer and make sure it fits their problem before you just start going building stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Because again, I've talked about this plenty of times. I'll reiterate, like at some point we're all making assumptions when we solve a problem, right? But like the more data and validation you can get on those assumptions, the more right you're likely to be. Yeah. But if it's all on assumption, you're going to miss the mark. Yeah. And by the time you actually build and ship something and put it in front of something, I can tell you so clearly that it's going to be wrong. Yeah. And it's not going to be good enough.
I've failed in my career way more than I've been successful. And every failure was an assumption that I was so convinced was right. The successes I've had were ones where I put my assumptions aside, just did the homework, found someone with a specific problem and I could solve it, and then I'd build the solution. That's the best way to build a business.
Yeah, absolutely right. So
we're building Nuvi, and I made all these forecasts and I was so wrong, but luckily wrong in the right direction. Like we were blowing our projections out of the water. Like we were doing phenomenally well. And
so we
had so much help because we launched with Gatorade and even the word of mouth, like they did a bunch of our initial sales because they were like saying, this is so cool. And then NBA and NFL and other doors opened because they just, it was good.
I'd imagine that's how long from that first time when they said, yeah, we're in, we'll even give you a little bit of money. Like how long until you were able to get them a product that works?
About 6 months.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah. And we actually, as part of the contract, we said, we'll deliver version 1 by this date, or we'll start paying you back. Like there were some penalties associated with it because we wanted them to know that we were super serious about this. We weren't just going to take their money and disappear.
So how did that feel on you though? Like, I mean, there's teeth in that contract, right? Like
there is, but when we actually spent a couple of days with the early developers and we mapped out what was going to be version 1. And by this point in my career, I actually had some pretty decent product chops. And so I was able to sit down with the dev team and say, okay, here's what we're trying to build. Here's the solution. Here's the use case. Here's exactly what it needs to do. They were brilliant engineers. They did the homework and we mapped it out. We thought we could build it in about 3 months. Okay. And so I made this promise of 6 months by saying like, there's some unknowns. There's some stuff that we won't know.
How did you deal with scope creep back then? Right. Cause like that happens to every project where you guys, cause there were some real penalties if you didn't hit the mark. Yeah. So it's like, did you think about that, or did everyone stay really focused on like what?
They stayed really focused. Okay. And luckily, again, because this wasn't my first product rodeo, like I'd done this at DTI and in other places in the past, that I had learned the painful, like the problems associated with scope creep. Mm-hmm. And so we were, I wouldn't say perfect, but we were very, very vigilant on sticking to like, this is what we're delivering and we're staying in our lane. And we were pretty good at that. That's awesome. And I'm the one who has a tendency to like wander as a visionary dreamer. And so some of the engineers would be like, no, dude. And we had a good, ability that they could like check me and like keep me out of trouble.
Just so we can have a sense of scale. I mean, a lot of things happened like in growing Nuvi, and we'll probably come back to some of these early days, but like, you had some big logos, like some really, really notable customers. Mm-hmm. I think, wasn't even Amazon a customer at one point?
A division of or something. It wasn't like the whole company, but yeah.
I mean, it just, but a lot of like sports leagues, teams.
Yeah.
Like,
and that really is tip of the spear was Gatorade. Yeah. And they're associated with celebrities, athletes, all the professional leagues. So they opened so many doors for us. I mean, not like it wasn't, we had like an official referral agreement, but they were so proud of it and that they were kind of the instigators of it, that they pimped us out. I mean, they were great about kind of helping open the doors for a lot of things. And so, and we said like, I mean, when we called people, we did a lot of cold calling, but we had some recognition pretty early just because we could even say like, yeah, Gatorade uses it. And they're like, a lot of people are like, well, if it's good enough for Gatorade, then it's good enough for me, you know?
So you're able to fund the initial start of this, right? Because you got a customer,
Yeah.
but how'd you think about like, were you going to try and fundraise? Was that a thing? Did you feel like
we were on the fence about it, but we knew that if we wanted to start sales and marketing, and again, this is like, even though social media was kind of a thing, there wasn't like we could just start building a content machine or like what people talk about now, right? So we knew that we had to like invest in marketing and invest in a sales team. And how are we going to do that? Because those investments you have to make months in advance of realizing the revenue for that. So that's what we were like, okay, we probably need to raise money so that we can hire some salespeople, invest in some marketing, and get that flywheel going to like start generating lots of revenue. And so we met with a couple of different VCs, with a couple of different angels, and we ended up getting the best term sheet from an angel investor. And
what did the VCs say to you? Do they think it was a good idea, a bad idea?
I mean, everyone could see, I mean, again, because it wasn't like we were just pitching them an idea. We're like, we have customers, we have sales, revenue. And so I think we got multiple term sheets, like multiple people were interested. It just came down to like how much equity they wanted, what the terms were. And I would say my memory of it, at least, is back in the day, the terms were way more punitive, not as investor friendly as like the common instruments these days, right? It seems like, I think most VCs are a lot more entrepreneur friendly than they were back then. Like it was they owned you, you know, there were some pretty punitive terms in there in terms of like preferences, exit preferences, and
big multiples.
Yeah. So we got this angel that gave us good terms. But, and this is a big lesson I learned is, and I tell a lot of entrepreneurs, do as much due diligence on your potential investors as they're doing on you. That never crossed my mind. I kind of just saw this great offer and we took the offer, and I didn't do a ton of homework. And the way that played out was this angel investor and I never really saw eye to eye from that point on how to grow the business and scale the business. And we just wanted to do things really differently.
How much did you raise at this point?
Just 250,000. Yeah, it wasn't a big amount.
I mean, but this was also quite a while ago.
Yeah, you know, I mean, honestly, at the time, it felt like, oh yeah, this is great.
Yeah, exactly. That's
in retrospect, it's like, really, that's all.
That was it. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's a start. I mean, it's not crazy now. You know, with the market the way it's gone, like we've added pre-seed. It was seed, and then
and this angel investor, I think, right from the beginning, had said there's more.
Sure.
Available if you hit certain milestones. And so we said like, well, this is all we need to get to the first milestone, and then we'll unlock more and unlock more.
How many people would you have had at the time? Like, what was your head count?
I want to say less than 10, maybe 8 or.
You're still small too.
Yeah, we were still pretty small. Yeah.
And you know, so at its biggest, I mean, how many employees did Nuvve have?
When I left, we were about 100.
Yeah. That's cool.
And I think they grew past that, and then they went the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what was the next step for you? I mean, after you raised a little bit of money, I imagine you keep selling, you keep building product.
Yeah. So we started to build a sales team. We got a phenomenal sales leader, and he did a great job in building a sales team. Most of it was outbound. It was like pounding the phones, pounding LinkedIn. But the cool thing is we could name drop a ton of great names on the cold calls and stuff. And so compared to being a pure startup with no name recognition, I think, not to take anything, the sales team were phenomenal. They worked their butts off, but we had a little bit of momentum right from the get-go with Gatorade and some of the other recognition and some of the logos that we got on board. And so we started selling, and it started growing like crazy. And man, those were fun days, really fun.
So
we were hiring a lot, and I loved it. I loved everything about it except for my relationship with this angel investor. That was the only bad part about it.
Well, I think most startup founders have had, one experience or another with, an interesting person on the cap table.
Yeah. Which is why I say do tons of due diligence.
Yeah.
Do tons of references from people that you know and trust. Because in retrospect, there were some people that we both knew that had I talked to them, they might have steered me in a different direction. And I wonder, what if, if I would have gone a different direction. But
yeah, I mean, it's so hard to know. I mean, the good news is Nuvi is still a recognizable brand.
Yeah.
Even though it got acquired how many years ago now? 3 years ago now?
So which acquisition are you talking about?
The final one.
The final one, yeah. Reputation.com.
Yeah.
That was probably 19.
And here's the irony.
Yeah, 2019.
Reputation.com owns my company and your company.
I know, it's so crazy. And that's that's a whole other story, but for you listeners out there, I actually brought Nuvi as a potential sale for you to buy.
Yeah.
Which there was a whole side strategy of maybe getting me back involved there and whatever, but
which I would have. I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
We went and met with Dalton.
Yeah, that didn't pan out.
Yeah, it was a Nuvi, candidly it was bigger than us, and though we could have done the merger, it would have just, it would have been interesting. It could have happened too. And maybe I should have done it. We would have been partners.
Yeah.
That would have been fun.
Yeah.
But it was a great business. I mean, it was doing a lot of revenue, a lot of revenue, and really good customer contracts. I mean, there were some SMB sales too, but there was a lot of big logos.
Yeah. We had some massive logos. So it was weird. Our revenue table was pretty spread out from $1,500 a month to tens of thousands a month, or I think we even had a couple of customers in the hundreds of thousands a month. So, yeah.
Well, it's cool. So the company gets acquired, you leave at, some point prior to that. And I think, what did your wife say about all that? Not just you leaving, but, you guys had to start thinking about we're going to do something different. Do I want to do another business?
Yeah.
I don't know. What was that like?
It was hard because my career is a series of, this is the last business I'm going to be in forever, right? I've never, ever had this attitude that I'm just going to do this for a couple of years and flip it. Everything I've done, I was all in and committed maybe for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so again, I kind of left Nuvi without a clear plan and was like, all right, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And I thought if I'd ever left Nuvi at a certain point, I'd have enough money that I could invest and mentor other startups. So I kind of wanted to be a cool angel investor that was helping startups and coaching startups, but investing in the ones that I loved. I thought that would be my retirement years or whatever. So I thought, well, could I do that now? And so I did incorporate a consulting company and I started doing some consulting, but I didn't get very far before Bubba Page, phenomenal, one of the coolest dudes ever, called me up and he said, hey, I got accepted into Techstars in Boulder for this idea that I've got.
Right.
And, but he wanted me to come with him to Techstars and I couldn't go because I was not completely unraveled from Nuvi. And it was a day, almost a full-time job for months for me to just all the legal paperwork, all the stuff to make sure that my equity was secure. And I was simultaneously trying to cash out some of my equity because Johnny Hanna's story, I had not been paying myself a massive paycheck.
Right. You're a
so
startup.
On paper, I had a ton of money, but I had nothing in the bank.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So I'm I need to get some cash out.
Yeah.
And that's where Kickstart got involved. They ended up actually buying some of my equity and giving me some cash. But I wasn't able to commit to go to Techstars because I still wrapped up in all the stuff. So Bubba and I kept in touch. He went to Techstars. We talked frequently throughout the program. He kind of told me how his idea was evolving and stuff. And then when he got out of Techstars, I think Kickstart invested a little bit and some other groups invested.
And he raised a little bit.
And then Bubba came to me and he said, Kay, are you ready? And I said, I would love to. And this is a tribute to Bubba.
He's also going to come on the podcast too.
Yeah.
I think next month.
Yeah. He's awesome. Anyway, I loved every minute working with Bubba. He's phenomenal. And but I said, and to his credit, I said, I want half of the business. But if you give me half, I'll work for free. I mean, don't pay me zero. So like the revenue, like we're not increasing the burn. And he thought about it. It took him a while to think about it, but to his credit, he's like, okay, I want you involved. I think we ended up with like 55-45 or something, but he gave me a huge chunk, which is awesome of him and pretty uncharacteristic.
Right.
And then after that, we got a couple of other people that had ownership, and there was the investors. And so, it didn't stay 55-45, but like we were equally yoked pretty close, and then got diluted together down to like where the cap table made sense. And we had the right people involved, and other people were in it. And then we were off to the races. It was originally called Quota Deck. It was originally a platform for salespeople to sell other people's products and get commissions. And so if you had a network of people in a certain industry,
like an influencer or something,
like a B2B influencer, almost
totally.
like you could sell 10 different products, and companies would pay you just on a commission only basis.
Right.
But they were happy to do that because they didn't have to pay your salary or whatever. So the idea was that we would build like this network of independent salespeople selling B2B software, and any given salesperson could be selling for like 10 different companies on this
making
platform.
Referrals. Yeah.
That was Quota Deck. And then through Techstars and through a bunch of like conversations with customers and stuff, it evolved and pivoted way more to a referral platform sitting on top of LinkedIn, where somebody would sign up and connect their LinkedIn profile, and then we'd search through their entire network, and we'd say, if you came onto the business and you were trying to find clients for distro, we would show you, here are the top 5 or 10 or 25, however many made sense, of people who were super connected to your ideal customer.
Right.
So you'd kind of say, here's what I'm looking for. And then we'd say, here's all the connectors to those businesses.
Right.
And you can reach out to these guys, and we'll reward them for making introductions for you. So we were rewarding the connectors. You were paying us for qualified leads, or it's better than leads. It was like warm introductions to your ideal customers.
Right.
And we were motivating the connectors on the back end. Problem with that was double-sided network.
Yeah.
How do we get enough connectors being willing to sell introductions, and enough customers paying us for that? The customers were waiting for there to be tons of connectors. The connectors were waiting for there to be tons of customers to get paid. And we could never quite get enough of one side or the other to for it to take off.
How long did you guys run that?
About 2 years.
Okay.
And then Peterson was an investor, Kickstart was an investor, and we kind of had to wind it down. And I think that broke both Bubba's and my heart. He'll talk about it because he's like, recovering from a failure like that is hard, because almost everything that he had been involved in up to that point had been successful. As far as startups were concerned, I had not yet had a failure. I'd had a couple of minor successes in the movie, but neither one of us had just a flat out shut it down, failure. And that was hard. Yeah, really hard.
So let's flash forward to Awsm, as we've got a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
I imagine, I'm making an assumption, you got asked to come in and run this company, right?
Yeah.
And how does that feel now? Because I think you took a break for a bit, right?
I've always been consulting.
Yeah,
but it had been a while since I've been
anything.
A CEO. No.
For a
In
few
fact,
years.
I was consulting after Nuvi and after Quota Deck, after Outro, I was consulting, and I had a number of different consultants, but I committed to Big Leap, who was a consulting client.
That's right.
I committed to them full time for about a year. Phenomenal team. Love that company. Love the people. So I was with them for about a year. They had a couple of inbound acquisition requests. And so we navigated a bunch of those. Ultimately, none of them panned out, but I kind of helped them since I'd been through a lot of that, like navigate some of that. And then after Big Leap, there was another company that I'd been doing consulting for called Audio Hook that does podcast advertising, basically, and jumped in with them full time for about a year, and always kind of had some consulting stuff going on. And so I'm mixing consulting and sort of diving in. But what was interesting, I learned two things about myself during that process. One is I thought I loved consulting for the fact that I got paid like embarrassing money sometimes for my time. And so I could work like 20 hours a week or less and make as much or more as I'd ever made. So I loved that. I loved the flexibility. I was in control of my schedule. I worked from home and was with my kids and my family a lot. Like that was all really good. Yeah. But I felt empty inside. And I didn't realize how much I would miss building. It didn't dawn on me until I had been doing consulting for a while that I'm a builder.
Totally.
For me to feel fulfilled, for me to feel happy and energized and motivated, I need to be building something.
Yep.
And even working with those other companies, I liked it, but I was kind of still in an advisory role. I wasn't running. And that's the other piece is I'm not a great sidekick. And I don't want this to sound arrogant in any way, but I like to be in charge.
Yeah.
I like it. I kind of thrive.
You're an entrepreneur.
In a weird way. I thrive. Yeah. Again, going all the way back to like the kid that was like, I didn't just do a lemonade stand. I hired other people. Something about me is I thrive sort of in scenarios where the pressure is all on me and the buck stops with me. And I ultimately have to like make the final decision. And I like leading people and leading teams. And hopefully I've been good at that. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes, but one thing that's made me proud over the years is I think most of the people, not all, but most of the people that I've worked with, if you go talk to them or when people talk to them, I think most people would say, oh, I loved working with Dave. Dave was great. And that might be one of my most valuable pieces. Like my legacy is that I think most people have enjoyed working for me or working with me. But I've realized I'm not a great consultant. I'm not a great sidekick because I just like building it myself. And I like being kind of in the driver's seat. And in a weird way, I like the pressure being on me to make this thing happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it kind of like, it wakes you up every day.
Yeah.
You know, like it's what gets me going. And it's hard because like, it's also kind of shitty some days. And
it's so
also
hard.
like,
my wife's like, why do you like this? You're such you're a masochist.
Like a literal addict.
Yeah, I am. It is an addiction.
Yeah.
It definitely, I'm an adrenaline junkie in that I somehow thrive with the stress.
Yeah.
I feel the stress, but somehow it's motivating to me. I don't get overwhelmed by it. It's like a fuel for me or something.
Yeah, I think when it gets extra stressful or extra critical, like in any business, because they all have points of inflection, right?
Yeah.
And you find who excels under pressure and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, I excel under pressure, which is really crappy.
Like 80 miles an hour in a Baja car.
Yeah, exactly.
Flipping it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm rolling it.
Yeah, I rolled my race car this year a couple times.
Yeah. But that's the thing is we're weirdly wired that when I was consulting, I would have told you before that was my dream scenario.
Yeah.
But I felt kind of empty inside.
Yeah.
I was missing that juice that, okay, I'm excited. And since I've started working with Awsm, I jump out of bed. I'm pumped. I'm excited. Like there's a whole new level of energy there. And my wife's seen it. Like it's actually really fun.
It feels good. I felt the same, like after selling Jump, which, you know, if anyone hasn't put two and two together, the same company ended up acquiring both our companies, which is kind of fun.
We're all in the same family.
Yeah. Our products are like in the same product suite now, you know? But it's like, there was a time I felt kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it. I felt like a little bit of a zombie. Like I was good. I was happy, but I wasn't energized.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, then when I asked my wife, I was like, hey, do we have it in us to go do this again? because we could have not worked, or like, not done a big, crazy, risky thing again. And I remember she said to me something along the lines of like, well, we didn't sign up to do this mediocre, or something along those lines. And I was like, and she doesn't say stuff like that normally. And I'll never forget that. So I was like, all right, let's do it. Risk it all. Let's go. Let's go again. Yeah. And then now, like last week was kind of stressful. I'm like, what the hell? What did I sign up to do this for? But it's part of it.
Theodore Roosevelt, the man in the arena. And I should have it memorized word for word, but the gist of it is that in the battle of life, it's not the critic who counts. It's the man who's in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and tears and blood, who at his best attempts, these valiant achievements, at the worst, ends up failing, but will basically in the end know the great triumphs of someone who attempted, even if they failed. And it's not. So I realized, that when I read that quote the first time, I think I even got some tears because it resonated so deeply with me that as I've become older and wiser, more seasoned as an entrepreneur, it's way less about the outcome and way more about the ride, the experience.
Totally.
And I would rather be on my deathbed having failed at everything that I tried, but have tried it all and made my best attempt at all, than to be too afraid to not have attempted all those things. Right. That for me, it's like, I'd rather try and fail than not try.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I remember my dad telling me, I would work for, my dad was a small business owner. He said, I would work for pennies to have the freedom I have to do what I do every day. Yeah. I'm like, it's true. So where can people get in touch with you if they've got questions?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can find me. I think I can't remember if I'm at David Oldham or at Dave Oldham on LinkedIn, one of those.
And you have a podcast as well.
And I have a podcast called Brand, Sweat, and Tears. I interview founders, but it's actually specifically focused on consumer product creators, product founders. Have had some phenomenal guests on there and have a bunch of really cool ones queued up. I love the podcast. I love hearing the stories. Same reason you enjoy it. And Awsm.com, awsm.com is our platform, our website. We're just starting to onboard our first customers, so it's a really exciting time. Our ideal customer is consumer brands that are working with influencers and want to turn their customers into raving fans, working with those relationships. We eat our own dog food. We practice what we preach, meaning if there's agencies out there and you want to bring us consumer brands, we'll give you equity in Awsm for representative of the revenue that those brands bring us. So we're giving out equity. Yes, literally awesome. We're giving out equity and kind of practicing what we preach in people who bring us business. So
great. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, man. It's been really fun.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.